Welcome to another episode of Monster Monday from the Ready to Die channel. This series explores the design of a creature I have built for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The stat block for this creature can be found over on the Monster Monday blog, as well as the Twitter and Discord, all of which are linked below. Slasher films are a guilty pleasure of mine. Though, maybe guilty isn't the right word. My love for them is pretty shameless. As long as it's watchable and has some fun and creative kills, I'm usually down for it. So today, I am merging my love of slashers with my love of Pathfinder 2nd Edition and presenting the Slasher Brute with the always amazing art provided by Seth Monster, whose link you can find in the description below. My intent is to make this a series of creatures, fiendish figures born from the cast-off pieces and parts of a god of fear and darkness. They are driven by nothing more than a desire to spread their master's domain, and typically do so by terrorizing the common folk of the world. The Brutes are probably going to be the lowest form of these slashers I intend to make, and call to mind some of the most archetypal slashers, such as Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, and Leatherface. Simply big, brutish lads. Since I mainly wanted them to be a menace to regular civilians, I built the slasher a Brute at 3rd level. This puts it in the company of basic ogres, which I think works nicely given that Pathfinder ogres definitely draw inspiration from the hillbilly horror tropes. Given that the Brutes are creations of an evil god, accidental though they may be, they have the fiend trait. But, specifically within my setting, this god is also associated with aberrations, which means that the Slasher Brute uses that trait as well. True to its name, the Slasher Brute is built by largely following the Brute roadmap, which includes a high strength score and a moderate constitution, since it is predominantly a physical threat. Its charisma is also moderate, and that is largely based on letting the Brute inflict fear upon others. Its remaining ability scores are on the low side of things. These types of slashers aren't usually known for their wit, or being very dexterous. As a Brute, they do have a low perception, which I also like for the aspect because how many movies has had the slasher miss an obviously hiding victim? As for its skills, it has a high focus on athletics and intimidation, with those both playing into and being central part of its kit, but it also uses a moderate stealth score. Slashers can be notoriously sneaky. That or their movies are just filled with people that dump stat wisdom and somehow perception. For the Brute's defenses, we are leaning into that roadmap again, which means that it only has a moderate armor class to work with. You see it a lot in slasher movies where the villain doesn't bother to dodge, simply tanking blows, and to that end it also uses high hit points. I'm honestly cautious about ever using an actually low AC, but I'm sure I'll find a creature that I do it for someday. Oozes obviously, but something other than that. With its constitution being up there, its main saving throw is Fortitude, which uses a high save, but its bonuses for the other two saving throws are just not as impressive. This leads to a low bonus for both its reflex and will saves, and I'm reminded of the times that Jason has been befuddled by somebody simply resembling his mother, or similar tricks like that working against other slashers. Now, obviously, our Slasher Brute needs some solid offensive options, since that is kind of its whole thing. I settled on a high attack bonus for the design of the Brute, with its Instrument of Murder, which also deals high damage. Now, while my Instrument of Murder has the versatile piercing trait, these traits should be a little flexible. But before we dive deeper into that, we need to discuss its actual Instrument of Murder ability. However, there is another feature of our fearsome foe we must focus on first. Core to the kit of our killer is Fixate, a single action ability that draws very heavily from the Ranger's Hunt Prey action. Honestly, the only part that isn't lifted directly from the Ranger is a bonus to demoralize checks. But this causes the Brute to pick out a target and designate them as its victim, increasing its bonuses to hunt and seek them. This alone doesn't do much, just sets up some skill usage, but it is relevant in almost all of its other abilities. But we'll discuss those specific aspects as we get to them. With that established though, we can circle back to talking about the Brute's Instrument of Murder. In classic slasher films, the villain doesn't arm himself with actual weapons. You don't see a lot of swords or firearms or other things like that. But what you do see a lot of is these killers taking up typical tools or everyday implements. From the kitchen knives favored by Michael Myers, to the pickaxe of My Bloody Valentine. Even Leatherface's renowned chainsaw isn't inherently a weapon. They're all just being used as such. I think there's some interesting symbolism and psychology in there, but this isn't the channel to dive into that. Instead, we'll just lightly touch upon it with the Instrument of Murder, which mechanically has our menace make mundane mechanisms into murder machines. This allows it to wield improvised weapons without impunity, as well as make them more effective by applying +1 striking runes to them. If all that wasn't enough, its weapons also gain the deadly trait against its fixation. Based on the claw hammer and the art provided by Seth Monster, I designed my specific instrument of murder with the versatile piercing trait, and honestly probably could have included the agile trait. But I wholly encourage you to give your slasher his own unique weapon to plague your players with. Get creative, have some fun with it. As part of the brute selecting a target and just diving towards them, it has Relentless March. Initially, this ability was simply sudden charge, but in the course of testing it, I realized that I needed a few more ways for the brute to apply Frightened. So in addition to the 2 strides and a strike against its fixation, it can strike fear into the hearts of its victims with a successful blow. However, if the blow lays out an enemy, such as it did in the Monster Mash, instead, all of the target's allies become frightened as they witness this horrific scene. Now before I added this ability, the only way the slasher had of inflicting frighten was through demoralized checks, which felt a little lacking for a creature that's supposed to be the spawn of a god of terror and the void. This gives it a fun way to close on its target, and also plays into one of its reactions, Shove Aside. This is a reaction for the brute to use while it's healthy. It's got a different one for when it's hurt, and it's inspired by the likes of slasher villains tossing aside interlopers on the way to their actual victim. It just lets the brute use a shove as a reaction, which has the chance of knocking an enemy prone if they get tossed into some sort of obstacle. In addition to displacing a foe, a major benefit of this is that it doesn't count towards the brute's map, as long as their next attack is made against their fixation. Again, playing into that single-minded devotion, or obsession, to their target. The final aspect that makes use of fixation is Fixated Ferocity. This functions exactly like regular ferocity, with the singular modifier that the brute needs to see its fixation. It refuses to die until it can see its target brought low. This makes the brute slightly tankier, though I am still of the mind that a high AC enemy with lower HP is a much more dangerous creature to have ferocity than a low AC creature with high HP. There's 2 final pieces to the brute's kit that don't hinge on fixation. The first of them is Eerie Environs. While Fixate is mostly drawn from the Ranger, this is completely taken from that class, almost word for word. It's a super cool and thematic ability, which made it an obvious choice to include in this design. Secondly, and finally, is Unnerving Aura, a simple and short-ranged aura that prevents creatures from reducing their fright condition while they are too close to the slasher brute. I initially designed this to be a 30-foot aura, but reduced it following the Monster Mash where I added the Frightened effect to its Relentless March. Part of the reason behind reducing that distance is that by making it 15 feet, it kind of introduces more counterplay. Players have enough speed that if they actually spend the action to do so, they can end their turn outside of its range, and thus reduce their frightened value. If it was a 30-foot range, it would take at least 2 strides to get out of range for most characters, which felt a little oppressive, especially for only a level 3 creature. With all that covered, let's take one final stab at the sinister slasher. This masked malevolent marauder makes mincemeat out of men, mutilating mortals with mucho morbidity. The slasher brute excels at selecting a target with its fixate ability and diving toward them, clearing the way with its shove aside. Once it has a victim picked out, it wants them to stay afraid, aided by its unnerving aura, its high intimidation skill, and relentless march, which also helps its action economy when it's chasing down that victim. As seen in the Monster Mash, the brute can be a menace if it selects a vulnerable victim to ventilate, and putting that pressure on players, making them anxious and afraid, is definitely how this sort of creature should be used. Now before I go, why don't you tell me what your favorite slasher movie is, along with what you think of this monster, and what others you'd like to see, down in the comments below. If you are a fan of slashers, you should 100% check out Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. It's a little meta and a lot of fun. But if you want to see other monsters and menaces I've made, or even the stat blocks and other versions of this monster, check out the Monster Monday blog or Twitter, linked below. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.